Welcome back to Podcast Land. I'm Victoria Wilson, here to introduce episode 2 of the Victoria Wilson Foster Hirsch podcast on the art of the arts. Today we're going to be talking about 4 really interesting, complicated, and irresistible 50s movies. And in no particular order, here's the list. The Steel Trap with Joseph Cotten and Teresa Wright, William Inge's Picnic, John Ford's The Searchers, and Ross Hunter and Douglas Sirk's All That Heaven Allows. And please note, I'm standing in front of a very All That Heaven Allows set. So hold on to your socks. Here's episode 2. So episode 2, it took us a little bit to get to episode 2 because the server ate our homework. And here we are once again. So just as a reminder, and we are now having this conversation once again. You missed a fabulous conversation for episode 2 the first time.
We'll be
But
just
we're
as
going
good
to
this time.
pardon me?
We'll be just as good this time.
Okay, let's hope so, because it's all impromptu, nothing. No script, nothing. So, just as a reminder, we are talking about 4 turbulent 50s movies as a part 2 of Foster Hirsch's Hollywood and the movies of the 50s. So, the first is the vice grip of the Steel Trap with Joe Cotten and Teresa Wright. The second is William Inge's Picnic in the sunshine of Inge's native canvas. The third is Ross Hunter and Douglas Sirk's All That Heaven Allows. And the fourth, which we may or may not get to today because it is such a masterpiece, is Ford's, and so interesting a movie. Ford's masterpiece of the American myth, The Searchers. So we're going to start with The Steel Trap, which is one of the pictures that Foster picked, a picture directed by Andrew Stone that came out in 1952. And it is a vice grip. It does grab you, and from the first moment of walking through that swinging door in the bank to the end. And so, Foster, this is a movie that you chose. So why don't we start with your comments?
Okay, I chose it for several reasons. In my book, I hope to identify some films that people might not know, but that I think they would be better off knowing and recommending. So a discovery. And I think The Steel Trap counts as one of those discoveries. I saw it in 1952, just a kid. I loved it. It wasn't available for many years. When I saw it again, it held up. And what I remembered about it as a kid was still thrilling and engaging when I was many years older. And I wanted people to see it. I also think, as you mentioned, Vicky, that it is a quintessential movie of the 50s, that the very circumstance of the film comes out of the social fabric and matrix of the 50s that I'm talking about in my book. And perhaps that's a good way to begin our discussion. How is this film representative of the 50s, in my opinion? And I'm assuming that we've given our audience the chance to see the movies and they're joining us forearmed. Is that right? So people who are out there will have seen The Steel Trap, because otherwise I'm going to give away lots of spoilers.
Well, if nothing else, we've given them a great deal of time to see this movie. There's no excuse. No excuses are accepted.
Yeah. Okay. So I can tell the plot. The inciting incident is when the very dignified vice president of the bank, played by the always patrician Joseph Cotton, thinks, well, maybe there's a chance that I can steal $1 million from my bank, and I'll get away with it, and I'll be in Brazil, and they won't find out, and my wife and I and child will have a new life with this stolen money. Doesn't that sound incredible? As a,
Well, remember, just to remind people, it starts on a Friday, it goes over the weekend, and he has everything planned down to the tiniest detail having to do with the passport office and where the children are and everything.
Everything. He has everything planned out. But why would this man do this thing? And here's what I'm thinking. And I really would like your input, Vicky. I see the opening of the film as very important. We see him doing his daily routine, going from home to work, and the brilliant score by Dmitri Tiomkin sounds monotonous. It underplays what is a daily routine. This man is dissatisfied. He has what is considered in 1952 a good life. But is he a victim of what is often called the complacency, conformity, and consumerism of the 50s? He lives in a suburban community, the kind of tract house that was very popular at the time. He goes downtown to a good job. He has everything, and yet he's willing to risk it for this crazy scheme of stealing $1 million. Can we see this against the attack, the conformism of that period? America, a new world power, everything in place. He has everything, and yet what does he feel he's missing? And his act is a rebellious act against his life, against conformity, against the system. Does that make any sense? And if it doesn't make any sense, does it, at that level, does it make sense in a film noir way? Is this movie untapping the larceny that exists in most people if they would only admit it? And he's acting out for us some an antisocial act that of course we would never do, but we could think about it and dream about it if if we respond to him vicariously and want him to get away with it. And I think the film wants, first half of the film at least wants us to root with him and get away with it. Does that say something about untapping our own inner larceny? And if we share it with him vicariously, and if we act out antisocial behavior through him, we don't have to do it ourselves. So the film's a kind of social containment. And then, of course, at the end, he puts everything back and goes back to his routine and embraces it. He's very happy to make that daily trip, except then he goes from the
Well,
office.
we don't know that he's very happy to make the daily trip in the end. We don't know what happens in the end. All we know is that he comes back and he gets away with it.
He gets away with it, but we're relieved. Isn't he relieved that he puts the money back?
Well, he's relieved, but we don't know. That's the question. I mean, the question that the film does not address, which is, other films might address that, which is he gets away with it and dot, 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 and then what?
And then what? And I
He's
think
crossed over into another territory.
he has crossed over. And he's acted out an antisocial impulse or a larcenous impulse that many people have. I think film noir is about that middle class character crossing over into an act of treachery or a larceny. I recall Walter Neff in Double Indemnity is a kind of preview of this character. Do you see
Well,
that?
but the thing is that yes, I do see that Walter Neff gets himself ensnared in into and goes deeper and deeper and deeper into what is a deadly cul-de-sac. But in this instance, in the steel trap, I I think the sort of accomplishment of the movie is, despite its flaw, which to me is that it is a plot device to make the movie. I do not see Joseph Cotton, patrician as you say he is, living that life with his, wonderful wife, who is played by Teresa Wright,
No less than
and
Teresa Wright.
and in this and in this life that he's living, and in that particular bank, as as going along with that sort of cuckoo supposedly off the off off the top of his head, spur of the moment concoction to say, I'm going to steal $1 million and I'll work out every detail. The way in which he methodically goes about supposedly taking care of every detail is fitting of that character. And then of course every one of those details falls apart, from her calling and saying, oh well, the children aren't going to be there, to the passport office, etc. The accomplishment of the movie is for me, when I watched it, saying there's no way that this man would do this. But once he's done it, and once he's in it, watching him go through all of the movements to get himself there and to get the money there and to get his wife to freedom and to success, the movie totally holds you. I don't see, also, I don't see this as a film noir because he's not entrapped in some horrible circumstances that are beyond his control.
I think he recognizes that he is, but I think your point is interesting that that his plan is a plot device to get the movie started, and you don't believe it's rooted in convincing psychology. Is that accurate?
Yes, that is correct.
That
I don't see
you
it.
see it as a device to get the story started. It's an inciting incident to create a story of suspense, and once you get into it, you it's so skillfully done that you suspend your disbelief while never exactly accepting the psychological support.
Well, the whole way in which this movie is done is, I mean, if we are really to take it apart, at every point that he is doing something that is a treachery to his life and to societal norms, he is endangered of being seen, of being caught, of the teller who's adding up the figures, adding them, coming down the stairs, going up the stairs,
He's
every
in
step
danger.
along.
Yes, he's in danger every way of his treachery being exposed at every moment.
And that's what creates the suspense. And at a certain point, it's interesting that they make this choice because as the movie progresses, he becomes unlike himself, supposedly unlike himself, but perhaps you could make an argument, given your case that you're presenting about this man who is living this life, but is this enough? Because as the movie progresses, he becomes a darker and darker and darker character and more violent, and but he betrays himself at every point. He betrays who we think he is, and who his we, meaning his wife, thinks he is at every point. And like the wife, we go along with it until she, who is the conscience of the piece, the morality of the piece, leaves him. Now, we've just given away the whole movie, so if you haven't seen this movie, even if we've given it away, it's worth watching because you will, even if you know what's going to happen, you will be caught up in it
You'll be
because
absolutely
that's
caught up. It's brilliantly done by this director who is so undiscovered and who's a cause of mine, Andrew Stone. But I think what you're saying is almost more complex though, because I remember as a kid, and I think the film gets us to sympathize with this character. We want him to get away with it. And then when the voice of conscience, the wife, speaks up and reproves him, we want him to put the money back before he's discovered. So the film manipulates us into siding with a criminal act and then and then into sympathizing with a man who wants to erase the moment of larceny and criminality and put it back and not be discovered, and he ends in the nick of time with not being discovered. But he goes back to his wife, and the film ends with quotes happy ending. But, and this is a big but, will that marriage ever be the same? The wife knows what her husband is capable of. The husband knows what he is capable of. will he ever have the same equanimity as that bank president, vice president at the beginning of the film? I think
Well,
not.
that's the point. I mean, the thing is, will the marriage be the same, but will he be the same because he's seen something in himself?
That's right.
But I think that, I mean, giving this movie perhaps more credit than one deserves, I think one could make the argument that what's really interesting is that as he turns darker and darker and darker, we, along with the wife, and it's a sort of insidious violence that comes out in him bit by bit by bit. We, in as in the like the wife, excuse it. We make excuses for it, which in our last conversation that was chewed up by the server, I remember saying, well, perhaps it's, one of the questions that you could ask is, it's like what happens to the world after the bomb is dropped? Will the world ever be the same? No. Will we ever be the same once we have seen what can be unleashed? And the answer is no. We
And
were not the same.
that applies to this film. I mean, the film has huge implications. I think Andrew Stone loved to make stories, to construct stories that were mechanisms for creating and sustaining suspense. I don't think he was a deep thinker, but I think in this case he stumbled upon a circumstance and a character that has broad implications for the period and still implications for now. And that is he creates a character who's one of us, but who has a touch of larceny. Do
But
we
see, Foster,
identify with that?
the thing is that, yes, I mean, it's true about the bomb metaphor, but what about what I was just saying before, which is when we see his violence and when we see him breaking the glass,
You would call it violence? I mean, he's violent, you would say?
I would say those are the act. Well, you could say they're the act of a desperate man, but the desperation reveals itself in violence and the way he talks to his wife. He's
And
never spoken to her that way before.
the way he screams at the stewardesses, "Shut that door!"
Right.
This gentlemanly
I
man,
mean,
Joseph Cotton.
exactly. I see those as uh, perhaps indirect act, but I think his desperation is coming out, and he is out of control. He's in a panic, and he is not behaving well. And my point that I just am talking about now is our our being complicit with him in that we excuse him. We're saying, wait a minute, what is this? He wasn't behaving this way before. What's happening to him? But we're also going along with it. We're excusing it.
We're excusing it. That moment, which always elicits laughter when I see the film, when he explodes at the stewardesses, I understood his frustration. I identified with that explosion. Does that make me complicit in his aggression and, if I think it's too strong a word, but okay, violence? Yes, it does.
Well, so that's what I'm saying. I mean, there is an interesting, one could see a metaphor in terms of, I mean, the movie came out in 1952, the blacklist, the McCarthy, et cetera. It's like, what do people go along with? How far will people go along with somebody who is doing something? We as an audience go along with something like this, as is the wife, who's the perfect real metaphor for that. How long will she go along with this until she says that is enough and I'm leaving you? And that's shocking when she leaves.
Yes, it is shocking. And of course, then he has a crisis of conscience and he returns. But they both have a knowledge of the fall that they didn't have before. I mean, it almost has biblical overtones too. I mean, this simple little thriller has so many levels of interpretation, and I think it's one of the great American films. As we talk about it, I'm convinced more and more, and I
Oh,
love
we've now
the moment.
elevated it. It was like a discovery, which is fine. And now we've elevated it. It goes on Mount Rushmore.
It goes on Mount
Um,
Rushmore. It's one of my favorite films. So there, it's and I'm
no, let's talk about, no, I mean, I think there's a lot to be said about it. Well, one thing I wanted to say is when I was saying he becomes panicked is that the movie originally was called Panic Stricken. And as I said before, the machine ate our conversation. They could not go with that title. I do not know that the reason why they couldn't was because of my father's novel, The Panic Stricken, which was published by Simon and Schuster as an Inner Sanctum mystery in 1946, and this came out in 1952. But that is a suspense thriller, and by the way, I recommend everybody read it because it's a fabulous piece of suspense. Speaking of keeping you on the edge of your whatever. So anyway, talk a little bit about Stone. I mean, the movies that he's made aren't that, I mean, they don't look that, I mean, he made The Great Waltz, he made Song of Norway. I mean, they sort of, he made a movie called Cry Terror.
Yes, he had a very interesting and odd career, unlike anybody else. He started out making innocuous musicals and comedies. He made the all black musical Stormy Weather, which isn't innocuous, Hey Diddle Diddle. And then all of a sudden in 1950, he starts a string of what I think are superb crime or suspense movies: Highway 301, The Night Holds Terror, Cry Terror, The Decks Ran Red, The Last Voyage. And this one is his masterpiece, but the others are really worth looking at too. He creates movies that the inciting incident happens right at the beginning, and then the movie is various ways of sustaining suspense. I've ignored what is my greatest guilty pleasure Andrew Stone film called Julie, with a non singing Doris Day and uh, fleeing for her
Rex
life.
Harris, isn't that with Rex Harrison?
No, that's another husband who wants to
Oh,
kill her. That's Midnight Lace. The
is this
crazy
Louis
husband who
Jourdan?
wants to kill her in this film is played unforgettably. I think it's his best performance by an unhinged Louis Jourdan. She spent
Yes,
the
right.
whole film trying to escape from a crazy husband who's out to kill her, and it's a one setup after another to create, sustain, and maximize suspense. Absolutely terrific. And Andrew Stone got the an Academy Award nomination for Best Story and Screenplay for Julie.
Was
Somebody
there a reason why he turned? Was there a director? Did he go to a studio? Why did he turn towards suspense?
I do not know. I have gotten to know his son, Andy Stone, and I'm going to find out. I don't know. And then after making these great suspense films, he ends his career with films that are so old fashioned. The Great Waltz, The Song of Norway, operettas in the 1970s. It
Well,
makes
how
no
did he
sense.
go to? I mean, that's the question: is did he go to a different studio? Did he go to MGM from
He had,
RK? I mean,
he had a contract at MGM, and they allowed him a great deal of freedom. And then Song of Norway and Great Waltz were made for other studios, so that he was an independent by that point. But why studios would have greenlighted old-fashioned operettas in that period, and they're real throwbacks, they're real back numbers. Uh, he, he's a fascinatingly unknowable director. He also had a longer life than any other director, living to nearly 100. So,
what was Highway 301? Isn't that a thriller?
that's a thriller. That's a very good thriller with Steve Cochran.
Yeah,
Very good.
I know Steve Cochran, who was. I mean, just the mention of the name sends chills down one spine.
Yeah.
Okay, so moving on now, let's talk about.
But Vicky, could I
Well,
just say one final word
sure, absolutely.
Steel Trap? Because I think it conforms to a classic Hollywood paradigm, which is films that tell you that really at some level are advising you to stay where you are. Remember the last line of Wizard of Oz, there's no place like home. Isn't the end of the steel trap another version of that lesson? He goes back to his daily routine. The last shot, he returns to his house. His wife is there waiting for him. The lesson of the film is to us in the audience: enjoy this suspense, but of course, don't do what the Joseph Cotton character did. Stay where you are. Stay home. Stay in your place. I guess you could say
Well,
kind of
I,
social
I, I, th-
control.
yeah, I think the movie does say, I think you're right to that extent, but I also think it's saying he's lucky he got away with it this time
And he's not going
because
to
he
do
did.
it again.
No, he's not going to do it again. But if you do it, you might not be so lucky. Things worked out for him in the end, and of course, in the end, it's the wife who bails him out with the excuse saying, "Oh, we were here all the time," or
Yes, and the wife becomes complicit, doesn't she? She tells a little lie to cover up her husband's disgrace.
So, what do you think? What do you think of? Just went out of my head. Um, let's talk about Teresa Wright before we move on, because she's always sort of passed over. And I was just watching her last night in The Best Years of Our Life, and she's our lives, and she's really, I mean, she's fresh and she's natural and she's totally human and vulnerable. And I
And
mean,
she
that's the part she's playing, but that's what comes, that's
That's what
what,
always comes through. And she
yeah,
doesn't seem like a manufactured movie star. She seems like a real person, somebody you might actually know.
right.
And I did get to know
Authentic,
her
authentic,
very
an authentic person.
I did get to know her late in her life, and she was that person in the real world. So unassuming. The first time I was introduced to her, she started talking to me about plumbing problems she was having in her apartment. She was so open and unassuming and available emotionally as a person, just lovely. And she has this distinctive voice. One word, and I can identify. Ah, that's Teresa Wright. A lovely, distinctive voice,
Right,
and she's wonderful here as the voice of conscience. And that voice of conscience makes a compromise, doesn't she, in order to save her husband and their reputation, so important in 1950s suburban America. What your reputation is everything. Appearances count. She must construct the appearance that nothing has changed.
right. That's exactly right. That appearances are everything. And that, I mean, in that way, it is the quintessential 50s movie in to that extent. And she's very, you're right, she's very emotional, but she's doing it really to protect her family. She has a child, they have a child, and that's paramount. How she's going to deal with him is another movie.
Is another movie, and I'm glad that Stone didn't do the sequel. He leaves it up to us to consider it and discuss it. But she is complicit. We, in watching the movie, have been complicit.
Well, that's what I'm saying. We are complicit. But I mean, I have to say, I'm not complicit in the beginning because I say he never would have done this. But then he totally seduces me and I'm caught
Okay,
in the steel trap.
okay. So you got into the steel trap too, despite your initial resistance.
Yes, I mean, I just threw up my hands and said, "Go with this." And then I was like I mean, you're on whitewater rafting. That's the thrill of this movie. You're
Let's
whitewater rafting.
I hope we've convinced our viewers, if they haven't seen it, go right out and see it, and let us know what you think.
Now, one thing that we've put up and we are putting up is we put together a kind of teaser for the next books we're going to be talking about. I mean, the next movies we're going to be talking about, which is William Inge's Picnic and then Douglas Sirk's All That Heaven Allows. So, I picked these two movies because they seem to me to be the essence of 50s uh, morality, 50s expectations, 50s demands, 50s societal looks, and speaking of conformity, and more to the point, speaking of appearances. It's all about All That Heaven Allows is more about appearances than Picnic is. Picnic is a movie that busting out. The sex is busting out. The expectations are busting out. Um, the body is busting out. Everybody's sort of busting out. All the characters, each one of the characters, except for the mother, who has accepted where she is and is trying to make her peace. But the teenage daughter, Hal, and the son, the picnic, it was uh, made in it came out in 1956. It's directed by Josh Logan, who directed the play. The play won the Pulitzer Prize. It was Inge's second play after his great success of Come Back, Little Sheba. And after Picnic, he wrote Bus Stop and Dark at the Top of the Stairs. So Picnic won the Pulitzer Prize Drama Critics Award in 1953. And it was originally a short, fragmented play about women of advancing age. Inge's mother, he came from Kansas, Independence, Kansas. And an odd fact, apparently more millionaires came from Independence, Kansas. I don't know why, but there you are. And his mother ran a boarding house, and he used to listen to the murmurs of the voices of the women on the porch talking. And that's what reverberated with him. And out of that, he started to write this play. And, it is about all of these women at different times in their life and what happens when it takes place in one day where on Labor Day, where they're preparing for the town picnic, when into this town comes a stranger on a train. And he is a robust, handsome, sexual, kind of lost soul, but who has all of the virility and power. He just hasn't been able to find a place for it in the world. And what happens to everybody in reaction to his presence. That's basically the layout of it. And it was with Kim Novak, who Janice role played it on the stage. Whatever happened to her?
She appeared in a few movies, but didn't have a large film career. She
Anyway,
became a
yeah.
therapist, actually.
Oh, really? That's probably why she wasn't that interested in it. But she did have this huge success on Broadway in that
Huge.
play.
Yes, she did. But I think
Anyway,
but
go
Vicky, I
ahead.
think what you're saying about Hal coming in and igniting the passions of the women of this community, I don't think we can overlook the fact that Hal is the object of desire in this play, in this movie. It, he's the one that uh, stokes passions and desires, and it's written from the perspective of a repressed gay man, William Inge, who grew up in a conservative Kansas community and repressed his own sexuality. And he couldn't at the time write about gay repression. So he, I think, transferred his own desires to the women in the play who are
Absolutely.
who are responding to this virile, as you say, busting out man. Um, but it comes from the playwright's own anxiety and repression, and I don't know if it's relevant to mention, but it isn't beside the point to say that William Inge suffered from deep depression and did end up committing suicide.
He did. He committed suicide, and he had an affair with Tennessee Williams, and I don't know how long it was, but he Tennessee Williams was a protector of him and a champion of him. And Tennessee Williams said, when Dark at the Top of the Stairs came out, it was described as a metaphor for the playwright's career. But Tennessee Williams said, Mr. Inge's own life was the opposite, an odyssey in which the stairs rise from darkness to light, through something remarkably fine and gallant in his own nature. And
But
I think he, go ahead.
yeah, but Williams was sexually liberated. He was sybaritic. He went out every night. He was not sexually repressed. William Inge was. And I think you feel the repression that he places onto women in that small town, which I believe would have been historically accurate and culturally accurate, that the women in this community would have felt repressed or boxed in for any number of reasons. Uh, but it came from the playwright's own deep repression and anxiety. Tennessee
Absolutely.
Williams was life affirming. Tennessee Williams was filled with sexual experimentation. He was
Except, let's look at what Tennessee Williams, because I will have this a long conversation about this. Yes, he was, but look at the way Tennessee Williams wrote women. They were always victims. They were always, there was just no talk about no exit. There was no exit for those women. There was no way out. They were trapped because he saw in those women the kind of um, a kind of soft, not in a judgmental way, but a kind of softness that he felt he wasn't, that men weren't allowed, and that they were victimized. I mean, he saw that, again, speaking of violence, that the violence is perpetrated on those women in those plays, and it
whereas
is consistently.
it is consistently, whereas here, and it's crucial, Madge escapes. She escapes to be with a man, but she escapes from what she envisions as a restrictive small town life in which she's going to be prized only for her beauty. And she sees an endless and dull life ahead of her. And she does escape, and there's a wonderful sense of liberation at the end of the film with the high
See,
angle.
I see it differently,
You do.
because you say, yeah, I do not
She
see that
escapes.
she escapes. She goes off with him. She takes the train. She runs away on a train. They can't even afford the car fare, the train fare to get on it. They're going to jump on a box car and run off on a train. And she is going to end up exactly like the mother, where they're going to be together for, this is my projection. They're going to be together for a while. He's going to go off, where she's not going to be able to stand that life, and she's going to come crawling back to the small town. She's going to end up in that five and dime. And the truth is that had she stayed, this is the interesting thing. Had she stayed, she could have married Alan, the rich boy, the rich son of the grain owner, who was desperate to marry her. And she has no interest in it, because of course she is coping with a situation where it's her looks only, whereas the younger sister is coping with the fact that she is so uncomfortable in her body that the only thing she feels she has is her mind, and she doesn't know how to deal with boys the way Madge can talk to boys. She literally says, how do you talk to boys?
But I can we disagree on this one, Vicky?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, we don't have to. I mean, this is not this is not Trump land, where we have to agree. Otherwise, we're on an enemies list and we're going to be
No,
deported.
I see the way the ending of that movie is shot, with the high angle shots and the sweeping train going out of town and everybody running after her. I see that as William Inge's projection into Madge of his own desire for escaping from his own repression and depression. I see the
But
ending
guess what? He
triumph.
doesn't. He does. Yeah, but he doesn't escape. Look at that. The depression was with him. The depression caught up with him. His career was in free fall, and he ended up committing suicide because he couldn't find anybody
He doesn't
to
escape,
love him.
but he creates a character who does. I feel that Madge is the idealized version of what William Inge would have wanted for himself, which is to escape from that small town, to go to the big city, to embrace his sexuality joyfully and openly, the way Tennessee Williams was able to do and Inge wasn't. And that Madge is the projection of that wished for, fulfilled destiny. Now, we don't know because the film ends with that fabulous high angle shot of the train going out of town and taking Madge to her destiny, whatever it is. I
It's,
see it
I
as a
mean,
positive.
you see it as a triumph. I see it as where I'm ready to start weeping for her. And what happened with Inge was that he did escape it to the extent that he left. He went to New York, well, roundabout, not directly, but he did what he wanted to do. He stopped teaching and started writing. His plays were accepted. He was a big, big success.
He had
But he
four
never,
successful plays, and then he wrote a screenplay for Kazan, Splendor in the Grass, for which he got the Academy Award.
but
Also,
where
a
was his
story about
Hal?
also a story about sexual repression.
Right. But where was his Hal? Where did he find his Hal? He
He
didn't
did.
find the Hal.
He didn't. He didn't. He didn't.
He didn't find the Hal because unlike Madge, who was almost afflicted by her beauty, she felt what's the word I want to use? I mean, she sort of felt burdened by her beauty because she said that's all people look at her for. That's how people see her, as a beauty. But she could have married the rich boy in town and had all the comforts, but she would have
Yes,
been elevated out of her class.
she would have been elevated out of her class, but she makes one statement, and Kim Novak delivers it beautifully. I don't love him.
But does she really love Hal?
She's
No, she doesn't.
she's infatuated with him. They're good for each other at that moment. I think she has a good time for a while when she
And
meets.
then what happened? And then what?
I
Okay, this is an interesting
don't
thing.
know.
This is like a gender projection. Okay, so you see it as she has a good time, and then what happens?
I haven't written that part. I see them getting together and escaping from that oppressive small town and the fate that her mother and the next door neighbor had.
Well, the only one who, you know what's true? It's funny, I was thinking about this earlier. The only character in that play who was not burdened by expectation of wanting to move someplace else in one's head, mentally, spiritually, or physically, is the next door neighbor, is the Verna Felton character. She's perfectly happy. She seems to me she's perfectly content. Here, take some food. You want to do some work. Here's some do he takes off his shirt. She's happy with that. She doesn't want any more. Unlike the Rosalind Russell, who's, the school marm. And here's the thing that Inge said about the women. He said, I used to think that women hated men. He said, but I realized that it was that they loved them too passionately and that they were embarrassed by it and that they were frightened by their feelings. And that is the essence of the school teacher, of the Rosalind Russell character, who plays it brilliantly. Uh, anyway, I just,
Well,
I see that when you conjure that image of the train leaving town, I'm ready to start crying because I know, as my mother would say, girls, there's going to be tears, and don't come to me. And the Betty Field character says, don't do it because you're going to end up like me. And how does she end up? It's like the worst thing that can happen in the 50s. She ends up without a man. Now remember, this is in 50s lexicon. She ends up without a man, having to raise those two girls on her own in this small town in Kansas, in Independence, Kansas, or wherever it's supposedly taking place. Um, but I did pick it with Cirque's All That Heaven Allows because it seems I see the All That Heaven Allows as the antithesis of Picnic. Because in All That Heaven Allows, she says, I am not a dead person. I am not the living dead waiting for death. and allows, she's a widow, she allows herself through the whole projection, the whole evolution of the movie, but she finally allows herself to fall in love with this man who is, almost 20 years younger than she is. And there are her children, who is, and instead of Betty Field saying, "Don't do this," it's the children saying, "But what will the neighbors think?" And you only, as the son says, you only like him because he's a set of muscles, which I'm sure was a very shocking thing to be said in 1956, when this movie came out. Or what year was it? 57.
50, 55,
5?
I think. Yes, I think it was 55.
Yeah.
But
Um,
but isn't
on-
this too a story of female repression in a small town, archetypal of 50s American community? She's repressed doubly. She's repressed by her children who are afraid of her having a man she's attracted to. They want her to stay with Harvey, who's dull but will provide companionship. And she's repressed by the voice of the community, the country club members who wouldn't accept this man, younger but from a different class. It's a very class based uh, film.
totally.
And yeah, she's repressed by classism, sexism, anti-feminism. This is way before feminism, and she is a woman who's contained, depressed, and trapped within the house. Those two great shots in the film, where we see her looking out the window, framed within the frame at the carolers for the Christmas season, and then the great shot when she's caught within the frame of the empty television screen. Her kids have thought that was an appropriate gift to give her because the television would give her companionship
The
that don't
television will keep her company.
will keep her company because they don't want her being in the company of this attractive young man from a different social
I
class.
don't even think it's that they, yes, part of them says they don't want her to be doing that. But the other part of it is they see her as the walking dead. You don't need that. Why would you even think about that? But she's not repressed in that she stays within those expectations. She is not accepting that. And what's interesting about that is that she is the most conventional person. As she says, she doesn't want to cause trouble. She's not there to fight society. She just wants to be a
She's not a,
happy,
yeah, she's not a rebel.
right. She just wants to be a happy homemaker with her children, living her country set life, even though it's not that interesting to her. And then she breaks out of that. She says, "I am not going to stay with that." And two points on that is, one is that, uh, as I said in the previous conversation of episode, the lost, haunted conversation of episode 2, that Douglas Sirk said that what interested him and the reason why he made movies about middle class America, first of all, he adored America. And I didn't realize this, but he owned 2 farms when he came here. He owned an alfalfa farm, and before that, he owned was it a chicken farm? I can't remember, but he owned 2 farms and he adored America. He loved the look of it, etc. But the reason why he focused on the middle class, he said, is because in Germany, it was the middle class that allowed Hitler's rise. They were silent. And he says that out of that observation, he saw the middle class as, you could see it. The middle class is the sort of placid, um, where everything's in order and it looks great. And it allows for Joseph Cotton to break out of his life and to go into the vault, go down to the vault of that bank. The dark things are lurking back there. A lot is lurking back there that we don't see.
But the
Is that
middle class in this film is afraid of sexual expressiveness. Both films, Picnic and All That Heaven Allows, I feel are about the dangers of sexual oppression in the repressed and conformity ridden 1950s. her children are afraid for their mother to be a sexual being. It somehow seems a threat to them. Her mother,
Well, it's so foreign. It's so foreign in the language of that time, of
it's
that
so far.
land.
And the Rock Hudson character is clearly a figure of desire, an object of desire, like the William Holden character in Picnic. They both go uh, bare chested, and women and men, gay men in the audience, are attracted to them. And that is a threat to the children and a threat to the middle class or upper middle class country club set. Sexuality is a danger. It has to be repressed. And the Jane Wyman character, not at first, because she comes from that society and believes in its code, she overcomes that in the intention to stifle her. But what I find the ending of the film fascinating, but very revealing of the time. She goes back to the Rock Hudson character, but he has been hurt in an accident. And at the end of the film, he's in an infantile position on a bed looking up at her. And hasn't she become a nurse rather than a lover? I think in order for her in this time to go back to the man that she's drawn to, something happens to the man, and the relationship is, at least as the film ends, desexualized.
Well, it's interesting. Well, it's the woman is caretaker, the woman
She's
is
the
nurse.
caretaker. She's the
And
nurse.
we're going to have to end in a few minutes, but when I was watching The Best Years of Our Lives, there's the Harold Russell character, and Wilma, who's desperate to be with him, ends up he has her come upstairs. He takes off his prosthetic hands, and he puts on his pajama top. She has to button the pajama top for him, and then he gets into bed and he closes, and she puts the sheets over and tucks him in like the mommy.
Isn't that the Jane Wyman role at the end of this
And
film?
that is that the woman becomes the nurse and the caretaker. And of course, the same thing is true in the steel trap, that the woman saves the day and maintains and saves the family.
But at the end of Picnic, the implication is that Hal and Madge are going to have a satisfying sexual relationship.
Right.
Is not repressed. But before we end, Vicky, I did want to say a word about acting in Picnic versus All That Heaven Allows.
Before you do that, I just want to say one thing, which is this book, which is by Edna Lee and her son Harry Lee, All That Heaven Allows. It's a book that I bought. It was $328, and I bought it to see what was in this book in relation to what is in the script. And this book was published. I forget when it was published, but it was everything that is in that movie, every detail, including her coat, the kind of coat that she wears, all the dialogue. It's all here in this. It's all in this novel, and so I think somebody should look at this novel for that, because it was in the book, and it
Well,
was just
it was in the book, but what Cirque does is he turns it into a superb film. I mean, that I absolutely stake my reputation on the brilliance of All That Heaven Allows.
I don't dispute it.
It's
I
a
don't
great
dispute it.
film. It's a great film. And what is so terrific about Jane Wyman and Rock Hudson is that they underplay. The situations could be played for melodrama, they could be overdrawn and overacted, but Cirque makes them almost whisper their lines. They make what might seem preposterous or incredible or far fetched real, natural, and believable. Those are great performances. They
And
turn
also Agnes Moorehead.
melodrama into naturalism.
Yes.
Melodrama into now my problem, and I must disagree with you about Rosalind Russell. I thought she was god awful when I saw it when I was a kid, and I still think she's god awful. It is so overdrawn. It is so hysterical. I have a problem with Picnic.
All right. Well, listen,
Logan,
let me just tell you this, because we're going to go on, and in episode 3, we're going to talk about The Searchers, but we're going to come back to these movies. And look for the teasers that we've put out on Picnic and All That Heaven Allows, because they're fun and they will carry you over until episode 3.
All That
And
Heaven
all of
Allows is a great film, fabulous film, brilliant director. Picnic, fascinating time capsule, a very flawed film, and I have problems with most of the acting. The one actor who got an Oscar nomination, Arthur O'Connell, was the one naturalistic actor. He underplayed. Everybody
Well,
else.
Betty Field wasn't exactly over the top.
I thought she was theatrical. I did.
All right. Well, on that note, we will continue our arguing in episode 3. So stay tuned because it's going to be a lot of fun. And until then, we will see you next time. Thanks, Foster.
Thanks.